There is only one real problem in the world, and it doesn't matter whether the desired accomplishment is managing a sports team, building a business, or running an empire. The problem is the same: leadership. Because of the tremendous consequences involved and outcomes that affect the lives of so many, the importance of leadership is immutable through the ages and highly relevant into the future. Welcome to the Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor. Now, here's your host, Tom Lindquist.
You've entered the Leadership Lyceum. We'll bring you direct access to top CEOs and directors of boards in an interview format that provides insight on situational issues that confront CEOs every day. Think of it as a CEO's virtual mentor. Thanks for joining us for the conclusion of our two-part installment with Bob Flexon, CEO of Dynegy. In part one, we covered the importance of culture shaping in Bob's transition to Dynegy as CEO, and the continued importance of culture even in terms of direct business opportunities for Dynegy. In part two, we'll explore Bob's leadership in the bankruptcy, the value of mentors, and his advice to CFOs, CEOs, and boards toward development of CEO successors. Stay tuned. Before we turn to the interview, it's helpful to have the knowledge and context of Bob's background. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Accounting from Villanova, and upon graduation joined Coopers & Lybrand in auditing in 1980 and spent 7 foundational years in auditing. He was involved in Arco Chemical's IPO and then joined Arco Chemical. Over a 13-year career at Arco, Bob developed through domestic and international controllership, auditing, and strategic planning roles. From Arco, he joined the specialty chemical manufacturer Hercules, where he focused on operational finance and strategic restructuring of the company. Bob joined NRG in 2004 as CFO, soon after NRG emerged from bankruptcy, and as CFO, presided over EBITDA growth from $600 million in 2004 to in excess of $2.3 billion in 2009. In 2008, he was appointed COO of NRG, but returned to CFO duties to help the defense during Exelon's unsuccessful hostile takeover attempt that concluded with NRG's winning proxy vote. While at NRG in 2006, Bob joined Foster Wheeler's board. Foster Wheeler is a global engineering and construction firm and also a power equipment manufacturer. He left NRG in 2009 to lead the U.S. division for Foster Wheeler, and in short order was appointed to CEO over all of Foster Wheeler at end of 2009. Bob joined Dynegy in 2011 and led the company through an orderly bankruptcy in 2012. After emergence, Bob has led the company through a period of prolonged growth, including the 2013 purchase of Ameren's competitive generation fleet, and as previously mentioned, the 2014 Duke Midwest generating assets and Equipower assets, which doubled the company's generating capacity. In addition, the pending acquisition of the Engie portfolio will further increase Dynegy's scale and geographic diversity. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with the interview. We're back with Bob Flexon, CEO of Dynegy. In moving from CFO to CEO, everything sounds so planful. You face these challenging situations, and it always seemed that you had a plan. In the bankruptcy, you were already looking towards 2013 and 2014 and acquisitions on the back end of that. What was different for you, though, from an executive leadership standpoint between CFO and CEO? Were there surprises? Were there differences in the muscles that you exercised?
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that I never really planned for was being CEO. Mm-hmm. Throughout my career, and you mentioned it at the beginning, I started out in public accounting. And then my career path, for the most part, has been in the finance and accounting track. I've always thought about what are the things you need to do to be a good CFO. that's always been my focus. And I've never really gave any thought to being a CEO. And I always remember David Crane at NRG, and David and I, again, we had an open seating, so we sat next to each other there. And David would ask me at the beginning, is, what type of CFO are you? You're the type of CFO who always wants to be CFO, or are you a CFO who wants to be a CEO? And I quite honestly, I never really thought about it before, and I always really just thought it in the context is that I'm a CFO who will always be a CFO. And so I never really thought about it. So going from CFO to CEO was kind of a big step. You mentioned I briefly at Foster Wheeler, and I got a chance to find out there to know what I didn't know. And coming into Dynegy, I was better prepared to deal with that. I would say maybe the biggest difference, and CFO, you can get your arms around what a CFO does, and it can be a painful job, but you know what it is. It deals certainly with the financials of a company and the controls within a company, the reporting elements of the company, and you get involved in strategic planning and the execution, but at the CEO level, it's very different on how you think about things and how you lead. It's a very different requirement from CFO, and what I started to do more is reflecting back on influential people. Bill Joyce at Hercules. Bill used to be the CEO and chair at Union Carbide. He came into Hercules, and I worked on the restructuring of Hercules with Bill, which you mentioned early on. And a brilliant man, fantastic CEO, and a very humble guy, but very, very impactful. So I kind of look at why did I love working with Bill so much, and what was it about Bill that really stood out? And I could also highlight David Crane, who probably had more of a positive influence on my career than anybody. And watching what David would do as CEO, and David is very much a visionary, and was always is very, very action oriented, and also very visible to the industry, to the public, and recognizing the strengths of what Bill does, particularly driving an organization internally, and what David was particularly good at in driving kind of an external reach to investors or the communities or whatever the case may be, and creating a vision of how do you move energy from different points in time. David was a very, very broad thinker, and I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere near David's capability in that respect, but when I started molding those two people together, I started realizing this is much more than a CFO job, right? A CFO job is, again, it's much more narrow, you can get your arms around it. Here it's very, very different, much more visibility, much more leading, much more entering the unknown. For new CEOs, you're going to enter the unknown and don't shy away from it. You just need to reach beyond the things that you know and start spending a lot more time on the things that you don't know. The big difference as CEO versus CFO is that your degree of engagement needs to be much more of a 360 degrees of everything around you, rather than maybe a 180 degree look at life. And for things that are more driven internally, it's a very big shift. It's almost like going from left brain to right brain in some respects.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. We're back with Bob Flexon, CEO of Dynegy. Did you find yourself learning certain things, doing certain things to get over areas that you weren't comfortable in before? Or?
Yeah, and I'll say here another critical point for CEOs, and I learned this from Bill Joyce, is that the CEOs with big egos will ultimately do dumb things. And so when you think about going into areas that you're unfamiliar with, what's really, really important is, first of all, make sure you have really good people around you, and not just your direct reports, but the direct reports. And if you bring in really good people, they're going to have really good people working for them, and they'll have really good people working for them. And I think that's really important that it cascades in that manner. So now it becomes engaging with them, and again, recognizing the things that you don't know and the things that they do know. It's kind of like sketching out the football play. Everybody's got a position to play, and let's get everybody lined up and we hit it that way. As compared to okay, I'm the CEO, I've got the big ego, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to tell them how it works.
On the subject of you're going into an uncertain area, you're not an expert in that area, and you're relying on your people 1 level below, 2 levels below, maybe 3 levels below that. How do you draw the best out of them?
Well, it comes down to your visibility with all of these people. It's visibility day in and day out. It's when you have meetings on a particular topic, I encourage direct reports to bring others to the meeting to give them the opportunity to speak specifically to their area. And over time, you build the trust. And you build the trust so folks know that they can engage and have ideas, suggestions, commentary, and the like that go into the calculus of a decision that you're going to make. But it's really about trust. If someone thinks they're going to be either shut down or criticized or something held against them, they're going to be, quite reticent to offer views and opinions. So you want to create an environment that's safe to participate openly. And that's not something that will ever happen because you say, feel comfortable with me, right? It's only an environment will happen because we've been working together now for 6, 12, 24 months. We've had a lot of interaction. You know how I am, I know how you are. You know how in organization what we value and what we don't. That starts fostering the environment where folks are more comfortable in expressing views and opinion. But it certainly doesn't happen overnight. And again, it's something you always have to keep working on. But the trust factor. I mean, if you don't have trust, the organization isn't going anywhere. An organization with a culture that's kind of a mediocre culture is going to be a mediocre performer. And there's a reason why companies grow faster than others, and it's because of the environment that's inside and the freedom you give people to do their work and to come up with ideas and to be part of the team. And I highly value that, and I think the organization sees that as well from not only me but my direct reports.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. We're back with Bob Flexon, CEO of Dynegy. Is there development advice you'd give for the CFO to get different experiences or requisite experiences to make themselves more viable for CEO?
Well, I think from an internal perspective, if you want to develop a CFO in this area, I think the most important thing is having the CFO involved maybe in areas beyond what CFO typically is. And that can either be during board meetings, committee meetings, giving the exposure in both directions. Create a level of familiarity in areas that a CFO typically is not involved with. So when actually put into the job, the CFO is not seeing it for the first time. And I think the CFOs to have great exposure to maybe how Wall Street thinks about a company, but they don't really have any perspective maybe how our unions think about the company or how the representatives in our local communities or even environmental groups, how do they think about our company? And I spend a lot of time with environmental groups as well, and maybe different from other companies, but when they call, I actually return their call. And they're always shocked by that. So, we've got coal generation. So you get the phone call from Sierra. We call back and engage. But I think a CFO being around and touching and seeing that provides a level of growth. So when you actually get to the CEO role, you've got so many things coming at you. It's nice to have some things that you're not seeing for the very first time. Internally, it's experience. It's experience and being placed in the environment to start learning more about the topic and kind of how it all works. You get a smoother entry into the position.
On the board front, in terms of a board thinking about CEO succession and planning for that and considering or not a CFO, an internal CFO in that regard, is there advice you'd give to boards?
For the board, it's a lot tougher. I mean, for the board trying to evaluate a new CEO, particularly if it's coming from the outside, it's a much more difficult determination. And it depends what type of CEO that you want. I think the board first needs to decide what is the type of skill set that's going to drive an organization forward. Is it someone that's particularly good technically? Is it an engineer? Was it somebody that's very good at financing, or is it somebody very good at restructuring? Do you want somebody that's has the experience of what it takes to grow a company or restructure a company, or whatever the case may be, or bring in new ideas, or change the culture of a company? I mean, I think the first thing the board needs to decide, if you had to rank what are the top 3 things you want out of a CEO in terms of the type of influence that CEO is going to bring, a board really needs to decide what are the main characteristics, what are the main objectives of this new CEO, and what does that look like?
We're at the end, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. Any parting thoughts?
I think, Tom, the thing I would just conclude on, and we touched on at the very beginning, there's just nothing more powerful in a company than the culture in which you build. And it's going to define what kind of company you are. So, again, your purpose, your values, what do you want to be known for? It's a great start, and it really needs to be defined. That's the difference between a company that's a leader. You go back to the Enron, bad culture, bad outcome.
Yeah. Excellent, Bob. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our visit with Bob Flexon, CEO of Dynegy. Bob's early focus on organizational culture and addressing the human operating system at the outset of his tenure set up the critical organizational and human side elements to cope with, if not thrive in, the major business events that would ensue. If you'd like to explore culture shaping in deeper fashion, please visit the Senn Delaney website. That's SENNDELANEY.com. Tell them you heard about them in the Leadership Lyceum. That concludes our episode with Bob Flexon, CEO of Dynegy. Keep your eyes peeled for the next episode of the CEO's Virtual Mentor, which features Bryan Shinn, CEO of $650 million New York Stock Exchange-listed U.S. Silica. Bryan led the company through an IPO during his first year as CEO to the pleasure of his private equity investors Golden Gate Capital. Come back to the Lyceum for that discussion in the coming days. And don't miss an episode with your virtual mentor. The Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's Virtual Mentor, has been a production of Dinosaur Productions, LLC. Copyright 2016, all rights reserved. Come back and listen. It's lonely at the top.